Good morning, church. Today's passage is found in Ecclesiastes, chapters 8 and 9. I will be reading from chapter 9, verses 7 through 10. Please stand for the reading of the word. Beginning in verse 7, "Go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking from your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life, and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going." This is God's word. You may be seated.
As you guys just heard, we're in Ecclesiastes 8 and 9, and one of the things that we're going to do this morning is I want to deal a little bit more broadly with these two chapters because there's actually been a number of these issues that we've visited over the last few weeks already, and so I do that because we realize that we've already covered these, and so I'm kind of assuming a little bit that you've been following along in our series, and so we've talked about issues of life and death and wisdom and foolishness, and so I don't want to skip it. I'm not trying to just pass by it, but we've covered a lot of this already. And so I would say that this is a good week, though, if you're new or if maybe you haven't been to church in a while, for you to kind of get a sense of what has Ecclesiastes been about, what are the big themes in it. And so there's a sense of reset and a catch-up week. So that's kind of where we're at. Ecclesiastes 8 and 9, we're going to cover both chapters all across the board. But these chapters remind us that Solomon covers all of the things life under the sun. There's a sense of that where he is really looking at hard things and good things and tough things and things that we don't necessarily address in our life all the time. And sometimes that brings us to hard and broken moments as well. I was driving recently in Ontario, northern Ontario, and I saw on North Euclid, there was this beautiful house on Euclid, and the outside looked pristine, the landscaping was nice, but you could see construction workers kind of walking themselves kind of in and out of the house like all day as I drove by. I noticed that there was just a lot of things happening inside. And so I kind of like drove by one time, I peeked through the door, and you could just tell that they were doing a lot of work. They were kind of gutting the house. They were really stripping everything back to the studs and really getting after it in terms of just really redoing the whole place. And so while the outside looked good, the inside was really having a lot of renovation, demolition happening there. And so I think that in some ways, this is Solomon's work. This is what he's trying to accomplish. This is what God is trying to accomplish in our own hearts as we walk through this book of Ecclesiastes. That he's not trying to demolish us and bulldoze the house. He's trying to kind of strip us back to our studs and help us understand what does it actually mean to follow God's wisdom? What does it actually mean to be ingrained in kind of this peaceful understanding of what does it mean to live under life under the sun according to God's way? And so he takes the sledgehammer to the way we live. He takes a hammer and he takes there's a lot of dust and kind of like a lot of work to be done inside in order to demolish and rebuild. And that's kind of the idea that I want to use for these chapters this morning is demolishing some old notions, some old ideas that honestly, if we are honest about it, they don't hold up. And so we are tearing down in order to rebuild. And so the first thing that I want you guys to see that we're going to demolish together is this idea, this notion that life is fair. Demolishing the notion that life is fair. And so we see that in chapter 8, verses 1 through 5. So let me read this aloud, and you guys can follow along. "Who is like the wise? And who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. I say, keep the king's command, because of God's oath to him. Be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. So what we see to start with is this notion of fairness. And for a second, I just want you to imagine a school teacher. Some of you are school teachers. A lot of us have been to school. And imagine a school teacher right at the beginning of a semester, sitting down, let's say it's junior high students. And he says, look, before we even start one bit of schoolwork, before we open up one textbook, I'm going to go ahead and just divide the class, kind of this side of the class, you guys are all getting A's, okay? And this side of the class, everyone's getting an F. Sorry, it's just happening, all right? Nothing personal, by the way, this side of the class. But let's say that happened. This teacher kind of like arbitrarily just decided this side is getting A's, this side is getting F's. And just think about the conversation or the pushback that teacher might get in that class setting. Some of you are teachers. Some of you have been met with this kind of aggression before, right? So it's not hard to imagine. But there would probably be this discussion that would arise about, like, how is that fair? Where are you getting your sense of fairness from? And the teacher might push back and say, like, well, where are you getting your sense of fairness from? I mean, and so they kind of jump into this moral conversation about fairness and what the standard is for fairness. And I think that in our hearts, we all have this sense of justice and fairness that bubbles up to the surface oftentimes. It's right below the surface. We want to call balls and strikes. We kind of know when people are being slighted, when I don't get my fair share. That's always there right below the surface. We like to believe, though, that for the most part, life is fair. The good people get ahead and bad people suffer. Well, we're confronted with the problem that it doesn't always work that way. And we know that from last week. We talked about the idea of karma a bit. We talked about the idea of how good people suffer and how bad people thrive. And Solomon is talking again about this idea of like, hey, there's lots of folks that are good, and they're not celebrated. They're not encouraged. They're not lauded upon. There's bad people who are actually living a great life, who enjoy their kids, enjoy their family, enjoy success wherever they go. And so what do we do with that idea? And I would just suggest this morning that life is not fair, that we have to demolish that notion that life is fair. And so he uses these examples, two of them. The first one is this idea of authority, the idea of authority and kingship in your life. And he says how to deal with, and he gives us advice about authority. And the advice basically is, you guys just heard me read it, follow orders, even when it's hard. Follow orders even when it's hard. Now, I realize as I say that, there's like a lot of things that probably bubble up in our own hearts as we hear stuff like that. We don't want to be told to follow orders. It's not very American. It's not very much like what we kind of view the world and our freedoms in many ways. And I don't think that Solomon is so much making a political statement about liberty and freedom. He's basically saying that sometimes this is just the way life is. You got people in your life who are over you in authority, and it's kind of going to go best for you if you just follow what they say. And that's kind of his point, is that it's actually not fair, because that ruler, that authority figure might actually be a bad person. They may actually do things the wrong way. And it's hard. There's no guarantee that's going to work out. Look at verse 6. For there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavy on him, for he does not know what it is to be. For who can tell him how it will be? No man has power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. So he's talking about these kind of examples of like how no one really understands how power is given or taken. No one understands how things work out at the end of the day. But we do have authority over us. And it means that sometimes things don't seem fair even when following the rules. And so many of us know there's good employees who get fired. Right? There's law-abiding citizens who pay taxes, but they likely still disagree with public policy. And so what are we going to do? Every time just kind of rise up and rebel? No. Solomon says, look, it's going to go better for us. He says in verse 2, I say, keep the king's command, because there's a sense of authority put on him by God. So the Bible cares about how we endure under authority. The Bible cares very deeply about that. Titus 3 says this, remember to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, and to show perfect courtesy towards all people. So in other words, it's not if life is not fair, it's when life is not fair, do we still maintain our Christ-likeness even under bad authority? Look at verse 9. All this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. Ultimately, though, what we know is that God will right things in the end. There is a time. God is the final arbiter of what is right and just, and that's something that we should take rest in. The second example, other than authority and this kingship, we read in verse 10. It says this, "Then I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy place and were praised in the city where they had done such things. This also is vanity, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily. The heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked. Neither will he prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God." So I read that because there's a sense that Solomon says, hey, wicked people live, die, and they should be remembered for the way that they lived, right? That makes sense. Well, that's not always true, ideally, but not always. Some people, some wicked people, build a lifetime up of perceived righteousness. They look good from afar. It says in verse 14, "There is vanity that takes place in the earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I say that this also is vanity." So in verse 10, it says that they used to go out in the holy places. They're lights. These evil people, they're well perceived. They have kind of tricked everybody into thinking that they're better people than they are. And it just seems ridiculous. It seems crazy that that would happen. It actually reminds me of that. If you guys have seen the Godfather movies, Godfather 2, there's this kind of legendary montage where Michael Corleone, he's baptizing his son, and there's this montage that happens at the same time where he's taking out the other members of the 5 families, his rival gang members, and it goes back and forth to him like murdering people while he is baptizing his son. And it's this really powerful moment because it kind of shows in the arc of the story that this character is really living 2 lives. He's really presenting himself in one way to the public. He's saying, hey, I'm all about God, and I'm the right religious person, and I'm doing all the right things. But who he really is a monster, right? He's a villain. He's a terrible person deep down. And so this is what Solomon is speaking to. He's saying, look, there's going to be guys and gals who look like they're doing it right, but you actually don't know what they're up to, under the surface. And on the flip side, there's going to be people who maybe you even know are bad folks, are doing things in a shady way, and everybody else thinks that they are just, top of the class kind of thing. And that's just another example of the fact that it's not fair. It doesn't feel fair. That when evil people die, they receive accolades meant for the righteous. And he talks about in verse 11 why that's the case. He says, because we live in an unjust world that tolerates wickedness. And it seems backwards, but we see it every day. Someone close to us gets sick and dies. That's not fair. Someone cheats on their taxes and no one gives a rip. No one knows any difference at all. That's not fair. And so this is what 16 and 17 affirm to. If you guys want to skip forward just a couple verses. It says this in 16 and 17. "When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep. Then I see all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will never find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out." There's a sense of no one could comprehend. The preacher demonstrates that notion because if you recall last week, we talked about how the idea of schemes. It would be nice if there was this easy way for us to be able to approach a problem and to apply a simple answer to a complex problem, but there's not. Schemes don't work. And so the fact that people live a life that is dual, there's no simple formula for a complex problem. But we know in the end, Christian, that God will have the last say. That in the short term, people get ahead by doing evil, but it's still a hard pill to swallow. So that's the first thing that I want to demolish in our hearts, and maybe we've already been doing that in Ecclesiastes throughout the last few weeks. But just the idea, set aside the idea that life is fair. Life should be fair. It's something I talk to my kids about all the time, because if you guys have kids, you know, like if you have little people in your life, it's like they're always calling out what's fair and what's not fair. And I'm like, guys, life is not fair. We're not going to always get an equal portion. It's not going to always work out in that way. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we will review and look over to is this notion that we can ignore the pain of death. That we can ignore the pain of death. So verse 1 of chapter 9. Let's read this section. But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. And the good one is, so is the sinner. And he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. So there he's talking again about that idea of kind of displacing karma, talking about common grace. We talked about that last week as well, how everybody receives some notion of grace, whether it doesn't matter who you are or what you've been about. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, and the same event happens to us all. What's that same event? It's death. Death happens to us all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live. And after that, they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has a hope. For a living dog is better than a dead dog. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. And they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. I know that's a long section, but I really think that what he's kind of combining in those paragraphs is the sense of how fairness, how grace, and how good and bad, they're applied to all groups of people. And the ultimate way that we see that application happening is through the same event happening to everyone who's ever lived, and that is death. Death comes for everyone. And so it doesn't matter how you've lived your life, we will all die. And not only that, I like how he uses some examples here in verses 4 and on that I kind of want to point out. Because here's the thing, we all know by now, we can all kind of admit like death is coming for us, right? Like no matter what we do, no matter if you go vegan or overnight oats, right? Diet programs, so all the things that we try and do, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. We might prolong our day by a few days, but we all still die. But that's not what Solomon is saying exactly here. What he's pointing out mostly is that we ignore that reality, that we put it off, that we don't think about the idea of death because it's painful. And so D.A. Carson says this. He says, death is an enemy. It can be a fierce one. It is ugly. It destroys relationship. It is to be feared. It is repulsive. There is something odious about death. Never pretend otherwise. I love how he says that. Never pretend otherwise. And I do believe that we live in a time and a place where we pretend otherwise. So we maybe agree in theory that we will die, but we don't really address what that means for our families, for our lives. You can't dodge death. And death is one of the biggest problems that Christ came to solve. And so verses 4 and 5 uses an example to say a similar thing. He says, a living dog is better than a dead lion. A living dog is better than a dead lion. The living know they will die, but the dead know nothing. In other words, there is something worse than dying. It's actually not preparing for death while you still have time. That's actually worse than the death itself. And this is true. I mean, I've interacted with people like this. You have too, probably, who just folks that walk around numbly to the idea that we will die one day, right? They're in denial about it. In fact, I did some research this week and saw some stats around that 64% of people who were surveyed say that having a will, last will and testament, is vital. It's important. But in reality, only 32% of people have a will. 52% of folks have life insurance, right? Some of you guys are like getting online right now. So if I find a quote right now, right? Those are the kind of things, though. It's like, are we just kind of putting it off? Are we, I don't know, do we just drag our feet on it? Procrastination? Maybe, but likely we are in denial about thinking about and dealing with the pain of death. And guys, the Bible says it's very important that we think about these things, not only for ourselves, but for our generation to come, the kids in our lives and the people in our family who are affected by our deaths around us. And so we think, we'll be fine. Just don't think about it, right? Think warm, you'll be warm, right? Like, that's not true. Like, I'm all for having positive people in my life. I probably need more positive people in my life, but it doesn't mean that we can ignore reality. And the reality is that we will die. Skip forward to verse 11. It's the last notion to demolish that we'll address here. It's the notion that we are in control. Again, another kind of summative way of thinking about Ecclesiastes. We've been talking about this in many ways. In verse 11, it says this: "Again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all." Let me just stop there. You guys can see these examples that he uses, kind of just goes through, like each of these things like should happen according to plan, right? The race is won by the fast person. The battle is won by the strong fighter, right? The bread is won by somebody who is wise, the riches to the intelligent. So these are all things that ought to happen, but he's saying, look, but time and chance happen to them all. Everyone across the board gets an equal share of common grace in that way. Verse 12 says this: "For a man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare. So the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them." Anyone who is goal-oriented knows how fast things can change, right? I mean, here we are in this room this morning, right? Our goal was to meet in that room, and here we are here in this room. And it just changes, right? You just show up and you hear from Kim, who's our contact here, calling us like, hey, the AC doesn't work. I guess we're moving over here, right? Think about how much that happens to those of us who make plans. I remember in my 20s, I don't know why I did this. It's probably just because I'm like a psychopath or something, but I like wrote up my budget, and then I wrote out my budget for the next like 15 years. And I was like, if I make this much money by this time, this is what our budget will look like. And I try to forecast that. I try to make this. My budget has not looked anything like that plan, right? Those goals that I've written out as far as how much money I make, or even things about milestones, or I want to have kids by this age, or buy a home by this time. Anybody who makes plans understands this idea that, man, there's no guarantee. Things change all the time. You may be the strongest person, on the team, and maybe get hurt. You could break your leg the first day, right? There's all kinds of things that come up. Proverbs 16:9 says, "The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." Meaning that we have these plans, we have these ambitions, we have these things that we want to accomplish. And the reality is that unless the Lord wills it and establishes our steps, none of it will happen according to our plans. And so Solomon shares this example, this kind of mini parable in verse 13, an example of it. Chapter 9, verse 13, "I have seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor but wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city." Okay, this is an interesting example, and it's funny, he actually says this in verse 15. I had this interesting example. It seemed really interesting to me. He literally says that. So he brings this up, and it makes me think about, you guys don't even have to be Lakers fans or NBA fans in general to know about Kobe Bryant and to know that there's this great affection for him in the LA area, that when he died, that was a big moment for people. His career was very impactful, so much to the point where, as you guys might know, they're actually building not one statue at Crypto Arena, but 3 statues of him at Crypto Arena. 3 statues for Kobe Bryant at Crypto Arena. And it's this way of kind of thanking him and giving him, all these accolades and saying, you saved the city of LA, right? You brought these championships to our door. You were the one who stuck around for 20 plus years. You're our guy. Kobe, we love you. And so that's kind of that idea of the statues and accolades. Now, so in this example, this wise man, he saves the city. Think that he got a big statue. You might think that he was given a plaque on City Hall. You might think that he had streets named after him or a school named after him, something like that. Nope. Look at verse 15, or 15b. Yet no one remembered that poor man. No one remembered him. And it's this example that, we're not in control of really anything, of how we're remembered, of how people love us, of the sense of man, I've accomplished something, I've contributed to the society. Excuse me. I'm contributing in these ways, and even in this kind of extreme example, this poor man who was wise, who saved the city, had no one remember him. Now, I realize this kind of feels a little bit sad and kind of depressing, and to be honest, this morning, I hope you feel some of the futility around life and our work and the things we accomplish. I hope you feel some of the futility, that there really is this sense that we are demolishing some old walls in this house, that we are actually tearing down these old embraced ideas. And you might think, what's the point then, right? I thought I had this happy life that I was building, and you're telling me that I need to tear it down and rebuild it. And I'll just say that's exactly what Solomon is after. He's trying to confront us with the reality that these notions, these old ways of living, that the world would hold up as wisdom, they don't hold any water. And if you're honest with yourself, you know that it's true. You know that the status quo is not fulfilling you. I don't know what those words mean to you, but you do. You've been spending your time and energy, you've been spending your money, you've been spending your family's time chasing a certain lifestyle, chasing a certain aesthetic, chasing a certain reputation in your community. Whatever that looks like for you, you know that you are chasing something. You are trying to be fulfilled in some way. And I think what Solomon is saying here is what we've already experienced in our life, is that at the end of the day, those things are actually not fulfilling us. They're not actually doing what we hoped. Augustine said this: you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. What that quote means is that if we are ready to admit frustration, if we're ready to admit that we remain unfulfilled, then we have to come to understand, what were we actually made for then? Who was it that actually put us on the earth for a purpose to accomplish? You and I will never be satisfied with the world. There's no other fountain that we can drink from that will satisfy us. And so I think about the examples in the Gospels of Jesus interacting with that woman at the well. And some of you know that story really well, but there's just this woman who would come to the well every day around noon. She would fill up her cistern, and she would walk away. And one day, Jesus was sitting there at the well. It was the hottest part of the day. And he's sitting there as she walks up. And it's odd because she's there. Everybody usually comes in the morning, but she comes right in the middle of the day. And she offers him some water. And he basically says, hey, I'd love to take some of your water, but really, I want to offer you some water. And I want to offer you some water that you won't have to come back to be filled with this cistern. And so she's like, that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. I would love to not have to deal with this chore every day. And he's like, well, the water that I want to give you is actually living water. It's actually a water that will satisfy you completely and deeply, and it'll satisfy everything in your life. And he gets in this conversation with her, and she realizes he knows all about her life, that she's had like 5 ex-husbands, and she's actually shacking up with the guy right now, and they're kind of playing house at home, and it's like, this is this crazy experience that she has, and she realizes what we realize, that we need something more than what we're fulfilling our lives with. We need something more than the status quo. And so how could Jesus offer her that cup of life? How could he do that? What made him special to do so? And I really believe it's because he actually drank from the cup of death. Because of his death on the cross, on our behalf, Jesus Christ took on guilt and shame and went to the cross and drank from that cup of death for her and died for her. And then he was able to offer living water. And the good news is that that same satisfaction is offered to us this morning. That when we allow Jesus to satisfy us, when we allow that reality to take place, I really believe chapters 8 and 9 of Ecclesiastes, they actually make sense. That it's not just all bad, downside stuff. We start to realize that we can start to process to rebuild this house that's been demolished. And so that's kind of where I want to end here. Our 4th point is rebuilding the house. This will be short, but we see these verses that you might have noticed we've skipped throughout. And I want to address these and go back to them because I think these key verses really speak to how we are to view chapters 8 and 9. The first thing we see is in chapter 8, verse 15. It says this, "And I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil for the days of his life that God has given him under the sun." Solomon commends joy, joyfulness. What is there to be joyful about in the midst of all these hard things in chapters 8 and 9? And it reminds me of that house on Euclid in Ontario that the builders, they didn't want to demolish the whole house. They wanted to strip it back to the studs, demo some things, and then rebuild it from the inside out. And I think Solomon wants to rebuild something beautiful as well. You can see this in verse 7 of chapter 9. It's what Michael read earlier. "Go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life. And in your toil, at which you toil under the sun, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going." Once you admit, this is what I think this is getting at. Once you and I admit that things are broken, you can then enjoy it. Once we understand that life is not perfect, that because we live in a Genesis 3 broken world, a fallen world, then we can enjoy it. Once you realize how uncertain and short life is, then we can enjoy it. So Solomon doesn't just preach joy, but he preaches urgent joy. He's like, look, there's a timeline here that you have to be aware of. Things are not promised to go forever and ever. Things aren't promised to go the way you planned. And so if you have an opportunity to enjoy a gift that God has given you, enjoy it. If you have family, enjoy that family. If you are on vacation, enjoy that vacation. I was thinking about that. This past week, Katie and I went on a road trip to Utah. It was beautiful. It was great to just go and drive through the desert and really enjoyed a lot of it. And I think there's kind of 2 ways that we think about vacationing, right? We can think about it from the sense of like, man, this vacation has to fulfill every desire and thing that I want to do. This has to be restful and also really fun, and I have to be entertained, but I can't spend too much money, and there's all these things that we want to have our vacation accomplish on our behalf, and it's like, man, this vacation, like a lot is riding on this trip, right? You guys have probably felt that way before. And look, there's lots of ways that we kind of have that duality. You pick a restaurant, right? It's like, man, I want to eat good, and I want to make sure that I feel really full, but I don't want to spend too much money, right? How far away is this place? What's the reservation like? I'm going to have to wait a long time to get in the doors. There's all these things, shopping, right? It's like, I love to shop. I want to have stuff, but again, the money thing. So there's different ways to look at life. And Solomon is saying, look, it's all broken. It's all messed up. None of it will fulfill you. Your life will not be as long as you think it is. Your job won't be as awesome as you hope it will be. Your friends will disappoint you. There will be things that will come up, like you will work hard all your life and accomplish great things, and then the next day you'll leave and no one will remember you. It's like, man, what a shot to the gut, right? And he's saying, so look, in the meantime, enjoy what God has given you. This is really the marching orders from Ecclesiastes 8 and 9. Because each of these things, vacation, food, shopping, seeing amazing sights, a sunrise, a sunset, there's these things can either be a chore or a delight depending on how we view it. The same reality, but it's a different response. If you've ever woken up early to see the sunrise before, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, why am I up this early? This is awful. But then you see it. It's like, that's kind of worth it. That was kind of actually worth it. And Solomon is preaching the sense of like, can you have the right attitude about the things that we engage in? It's all a gift. It's all a gift, so enjoy it. And so this is not the power of positive thinking, but it's rooted in truth that it's all of God's gift to us. And really, it's a foretaste. You know what that means? It's a small morsel. It's a sample, like you get at Costco, right? It's like, I wonder what that food tastes like. And so you stop by that end cap, and you're like, oh, okay, get a little bit of that in this little cup, and like, what do I do with the cup afterwards? And so it's like, it's a foretaste of what's to come. What is it like to actually enjoy the whole thing? And that's the gifts that God gives us in this life. And so I would just encourage you, church, to enjoy the things that God has given you, to savor food, to find joy in your relationships, find joy in your marriages, see beautiful places, like grill a steak, right? Like read a new book. Enjoy those things that kind of are on your summer list that you're like, well, is this really worth my time or not? It's worth your time. Like call your parents, right? Call your kids. Celebrate birthdays. Celebrate. It's one of the things that Katie always talks to me about. It's like I'm really bad at celebrating things. And it's like I think there's a theology of celebration that I need to lean into. And part of me understanding that God has given us these things means that we celebrate those things. Be generous. Invest in a neighbor that you've maybe met. Disciple a new Christian. Enjoy all of God's gifts because it's possible for us to do so in this broken, fallen Genesis 3 world, meaning that the fall happened, sin entered the world, but we look forward to a new, restored Revelation 21 world where God has the last say, where God has healed and restored all things that were broken. And so we accept the harsh realities of chapters 8 and 9, but we urgently make every day a gift. And we thank the Lord for that gift. Let's bow our heads in a word of prayer. God, we thank you for this reminder. We thank you for, in some ways, this gentle rebuke, the ways that you have been using this book to even tear down some notions and ideas in our heart, things that we've held on to for many years. I know I have as well. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would continue to do that work in us, that you would give us a sense of clarity and the desire to want to choose better, to live wisely, to live according to your word, not according to the voices in our culture or maybe the voices that we've grown up hearing in our own head. Lord, we ask, Lord, for godly wisdom. And so this morning, I just pray that there would be this levity and joyfulness as we even go into worship, that we would realize, God, that you are so good to us. You've given us community to be a part of church with, that you've given us friends and family, that you've given us meals and food to enjoy. Many of us will go on vacation this summer, and Lord, you've given us the means to do that. And so, Lord, would you just allow those things not to be pointed inward into themselves, that we would worship those things on their own, but we would realize that every good and perfect gift comes from above. And God, that there would be this sense of just joyfulness and levity, Lord, of realizing, Lord, you've been just so kind to us. And God, I can't help but think of the ways that you've shown your kindness through our salvation. And God, through the ways that you have picked us up out of our sinfulness, out of our destruction, out of we in this room who have all made a mess of our lives in one way or another. And you've given us grace. You've given us a new life. And so, God, we have so much to thank you for. We're grateful, Lord, and we love you. Praise your name. Amen.